Now let's get started with writing some Next.js code here. And for this, I'll shrink the terminal a little bit. And in this pages folder, we can ignore this underscore app.js file for the moment. We can delete the API folder in there. And in the styles folder, we can also delete the home module CSS file. We can keep the globals CSS file if we want though. Now we got this index.js file. And in this file, we in the end just have a standard React component. But to make this even clearer, let's delete this file as well, so that the only remaining file in the pages folder is the underscore app.js file. And now let's say, to get started with Next.js, we want to build a simple website with three kinds of pages. A starting page, let's say, then a news page with a list of news, and then a page for the news details. So when we click on a news item, and we're taken to the full page for that specific news item. And if we wanted to create a structure like this, in Next.js, in the pages folder here, we would create three files. The index.js file will be our root page. So if a request reaches our domain /nothing, just index.js will be loaded. That is in line with standard websites, if I may call it like this, where we also have index.html files, which are typically served as root pages if a request just targets /nothing after the domain. And here it's index.js, which will be served if a request reaches just our domain /nothing. Then we might also have a news.js file for requests that reach our domain /news. And that's important. With the exception of the index name, which is a special name, which is served whenever we have a request to just /nothing, the file name will be used as a path name. So news.js, the content in here, the React component in here, would be served for requests to our domain /news, for example. So not news.js, but just news. Then the news.js file would be served. And I'll comment this out to leave that in here. Index.js would be served for just our domain.com /nothing. And I'll come back to the page for a single news item later. For the moment, these are the two pages we have. And now what goes in those page files? I mentioned it before. Our standard React component, the React component that should be loaded for that specific page. So here in index.js, we can create a component just as we know it, typically as a function, and we could name this homepage. The component name is up to you. Now you must export this component so that Next.js is able to find it, so to say. And then in this component function, you return JSX code, just as you're used to. You return your JSX code, for example, a h1 tag where we say the homepage. That could be a very simple first page. Of course, we're going to add more meaningful content in a second. Now we can copy this to news.js and add it here. As a side note, if you're wondering why we don't have any import statement like this at the top, where we import React from React, Next.js projects support this modern React setup where you can omit this import and it's added behind the scenes, so to say. And with that here in the news.js file, we would have the, let's say, news page component, and of course also export the news page, and here we could say the news page. And if we do that, if we add these two pages, then in the terminal, in this integrated terminal here, which is already navigated into this project folder, we can start the development server with npm and run dev. And that development server is given to us by that Next.js project setup. So with npm run dev, we start this development server. Here you see the URL where you can visit your page. And therefore, if I now visit localhost 3000, I see the home page. And if we instead would visit localhost 3000 /news, we see the news page. And now what's interesting is that the content is just some dummy content, but if we view the page source here of that loaded page, then we see that in there we don't just have an empty skeleton, but if we look a bit closer, we find the actual page content in here. And that is an important difference to a standard React app where the page is not pre-rendered on the server. This HTML code, which we see here, is the HTML code sent back by the server. And since it contains that content here, that means that the entire page was pre-rendered. And that's why the content ends up in here. And the advantage is that we don't have any flickering on the page whilst we're waiting for it. And in addition, search engines would also see that content here. They see what our users see. And that, of course, can be a great advantage. And this is how we can get started with this file-based routing. And as you see, by looking at the page source, in addition to that file-based routing, we also already use that built-in server-side rendering feature without any extra setup, because it works out of the box. With that, let's now dig a bit deeper and let's see what else we can do here.